Welcome back, anatomy students. Today we're going to talk about the anatomy of the heart and only the heart. We're not going to get into the vessels in this lecture. So first of all, there's a number of layers of the heart. You have the pericardium, the epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. And it can be difficult to remember which is which. So I think the knowledge of prefixes, suffixes, and roots are very helpful in learning new words and for understanding what those words mean. So we've used peri in a few chapters already. We had the periosteum, we had the perimysium, so now we have the pericardium. So peri means around. And card, the root card, and like a cardiologist studies the heart, right? So card refers to heart, and eums are tissues. And again, we've had that one before too. So pericardium literally means the tissue around the heart. So there's this double sac called the pericardium. It is filled with fluid called the pericardial fluid, so the names go together, right? And this fluid serves as lubrication. So this is a muscle, and the whole organ is going to expand and contract, expand and contract, expand and contract. So it might be rubbing up against this pericardial sac. The fluid provides lubrication, right? So they don't get stuck together, which would cause tearing of the heart tissue wall. So that's the pericardium. In lab, it looks more like this. You can't tell that this is clear perhaps because of the preservative and because you're seeing the light right through. But there is an outer covering here that needs to be removed before we can really see the heart wall. So around the heart lining is pericardium. So epi, that prefix means above or upon. Like you have an EpiPen that goes into the outer layer, right? We have epidurals, which are above the dura mater. We have our epithelial tissue. So we have our outer skin. Epidermis is our skin on the outer layer. So epi means above or upon, card, heart, and then eum is tissue. So this is the tissue on the outside of the heart itself. So here along the wall of the heart is the epicardium. It cannot be removed from the heart. So here is a sheep's heart, and you can see there's no sac here. So the pericardium is gone, but the epicardium is not. So that is part of the heart wall. The myocardium, myo means muscle. So this is the muscle layer of the heart, which really is the bulk of the heart. So you can see over on this graphic here, this is a picture taken by my students in lab. You can see the heart wall, the septum, the ventricular walls. Most of that is myo or muscle. So that is what gives our heart its power. This layer inside that's quite clear looks like a lining, right? So that's the endocardium. Endo is inside. This lining is continuous with the valves. We're going to be looking at the valves here in a minute, as well as the inside of the vessels that are connected to the heart. So this one tissue goes through the whole inner lining of the heart and then out into the vessels. Okay, so we've looked at the outside of the heart, the walls and the pericardial sac, and now we're going to look at the inside of the heart. The inside of the heart has 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. You can kind of make an A with your fingers. Picture the line there, right? So the A are on top, and make a V with your fingers, and the V is on the bottom. So you have atria on top and ventricles on the bottom. Maybe that's a helpful mnemonic. One of my students showed me that one. So we have 2 atria on top. The atria are not very big. I'm going to go back to my sheep heart, and right here you can see the atria. All the rest of this underneath is the ventricles. So the atria is quite small. Okay. Both right and left, the job of the atria is to receive blood. It's just where they're receiving it from that makes the difference. So the vena cavas are emptying blood from the rest of your body into the right atrium, and the pulmonary veins are dumping blood or delivering blood from the lungs. So both of them are receiving blood, whereas the ventricles on the bottom are pumping blood out. They're delivering blood. In the middle of the wall here, you can see the interventricular septum. Just like you have a septum in between Your nasal cavities, the two sides of your nose, is divided by a septum, so is your heart. You can see the right ventricle over here, so remember it's facing you, so it's going to be opposite. The right ventricle is quite small compared to the left ventricle, and also look at the thickness of the walls of the ventricles. The left is much thicker than the right. And that should make sense if you think about it. The right is only sending blood to the lungs. It doesn't have very far to go. It doesn't have to be a terribly powerful pump. The left have to send blood to your whole body. So it's going out arteries, into arterioles, into capillaries. So it also has like this huge pathway it has to go through. It has to go all the way to your feet. It has to go against the pull of gravity, sending it up to your head. So the left side has to be a very powerful muscle in order to push blood throughout the whole entire body. At the bottom, the ventricles come together into the apex. So here's my pig heart. You can see the ventricles and then the apex at the bottom. The top of the heart is called the base. Normally think of a base at the bottom of something, but it's at the top. That's the flattened portion. In between your atrium and your ventricle, you have valves. No matter where the valves are found, you have valves in your blood vessels, the veins. You have valves in between atrium and ventricle. You have valves exiting the heart between the ventricle and the arteries. So no matter where they're found, the job of the valves is to prevent backflow of blood. It's to create a one-way direction of blood. So the first two we'll talk about are atrioventricular valves. And hopefully you notice that both atrium and ventricle are in these words. So this is separating the atrium and the ventricle. On the right-hand side of the heart, you have the tricuspid valve. Cusps might also be called leaflets or flaps. So on the right side, you have 3 flaps, so it's a tricusp. And then blood will enter from the atrium through the tricuspid into the right ventricle. On the left side, you only have 2 cusps. This one is called the bicuspid valve. Blood enters the left atrium, flows through the bicuspid and into the left ventricle. The bicuspid valve is more commonly known as the mitral valve. So I think if you have a valvular problem, it's more common to have a problem on the left side because the left is such a powerful pump. That valve has to hold back quite a forceful contraction of blood. So I think that it can get worn out a little bit more easily than, or often maybe I should say, than the right side. Holding both of these vessels or valves down, are what are called chordae tendineae. Chordae tendineae literally means heartstrings, so they do kind of look like strings in the heart. This is a picture one of my students took. They had opened their heart from the bottom, so they're peeking up through the apex of the heart, and you can see the chordae tendineae there as well. So they will pull down on the valves to help open them during contraction. The other 2 valves you have in your heart are called semilunar valves. I don't have good dissection pictures of those. I'll work on those this year. But these are called semilunar valves. Up here you see the semilunar valves. They look like partial moons all arranged in a circle, and they're guarding the arteries that exit the heart. So in between the ventricles and an artery, you will find a semilunar valve. On the right side of the heart, we usually start with the right. On the right side of the heart, you have the pulmonary semilunar valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. So it prevents backflow of blood from the pulmonary artery into the right ventricle. On the right side of the heart, you have the aortic semilunar. Hopefully you can guess by its name. It's guarding the aorta. So it's between the left ventricle and the aorta, and it prevents backflow of blood from the aorta into the left ventricle. So that's all I have for the heart. We talked about the pericardial sac on the outside. We talked about the 3 walls of the heart, epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium on the inside. We talked about the 2 atria on top, the ventricles on the bottom, the septum in between, and we talked about 4 valves, atrioventricular valves between atria and ventricles, and the semilunar valves between ventricles and arteries. So next time we'll talk about those arteries and veins and how blood moves through the heart. So thank you so much for listening.